This week in Texas politics closed out with a lot of fireworks underneath the Capitol Dome. Let's get the headlines from our panel, and we'll begin first with Harvey Kronberg from the Quorum Report. Harvey, what's your headline for the week?
Intimidation works.
Brad Johnson with the Texan News. What's your headline?
Abbott's long-awaited win finally realized.
And business analyst Annie Spillman. What's your headline for the week?
Property tax relief measures progress through the legislature.
Well, the big news of the week, of course, being that on Thursday, Team Abbott getting the win with his school choice plan, finally clearing the Texas House. Harvey, the fix was in long before this session even began. Do you think that the Democrats just missed an opportunity by digging in and not trying to negotiate a better outcome?
No, I think once the president weighed in, whatever Republican support they had evaporated, and the message that came out of that caucus meeting the morning of the vote was no amendments. So the only question for the speaker was how to navigate a way to let them at least get their votes on record. But there was no room left for negotiation.
Brad, you agree with that? I think this was a missed opportunity for the Democrats.
Yeah, I think the votes were there the whole time. I mean, the big leverage the Democrats had was nobody knew for sure until we had the vote. There was no test vote in the budget this time, and so once it became pretty clear that that this was going to pass, I mean, you saw the rural Republicans. They negotiated something into the bill that benefited them, and they thought that made it at least palatable to vote for. So. I mean, I guess missed opportunity, but I don't know what they would have been able to put in there. That referendum thing was not passing, I don't think.
What do you think, Annie? They, maybe early on, months earlier, try to negotiate something better than what they got?
Here's how I see it. On one hand, this helps them to have a fight and have an issue to fight for their base and for their primary, and this is just that issue. They can play into the fight and dig in and create even more sort of rhetoric and pushback. And pull in more support for the Democratic Party, which they need going into the election, and it helps pull in the base, like I said. But on the other hand, it looks like another loss for the party and shows sort of weakness and not strength. So they could have potentially scaled down the loss by attempting to work on a plan. But, in my experience, when you know at the start that there's really no kind of meeting in the middle, then kind of don't waste your time. They may have been able to kind of lighten the look of the loss by not kind of piling on with the sort of sky is falling fear tactic, and maybe done some preemptive damage control and PR, knowing that they weren't going to win the fight. But I don't necessarily think they could have put in some compromise language like everyone sort of said.
The other big vote of the week was HB2, the education funding plan, passing with little opposition. Public education supporters say the amount is good, but not good enough to keep pace with inflation. Brad, Robin Hood is still alive. What reforms caught your eye that you think really may make a difference?
Well, the speaker emphasized this more than anything else, and more than the ESA plan as well. So, I mean, I think that shows you how important getting this teacher pay raise, especially finally across the line, and also the raise in the basic allotment. Although, some people opposed it, saying it wasn't sufficient enough. The one that caught my eye more than anything else, though, is we may have talked about this before, but the classroom discipline bill. That's the biggest problem in classrooms, I think, right now. Teachers getting attacked by students, and just general unruliness. Nobody can learn in that environment, and especially when it's unsafe.
Anything else in the package, Annie, that caught your eye?
Yeah, from a business perspective, I think many don't realize that this legislation also addressed workforce development in several ways, which is critically important to the future of the economy. The bill creates partnerships that support high school students in completing career and technical education courses. That's extremely important, and that was one of the governor's priorities, and it creates collaborations with local workforce boards and career and vocational programs. And so there was a focus on developing workforce pipelines, and I think that was very important. So there was a win there.
Harvey, what was under the radar for you?
School district flexibility. We're kind of in an era right now where Republicans don't trust local governments, local counties, local school districts, but a lot of there was some flexibility measures added for local school boards to be able to allocate these funds in ways that would be most beneficial for them. And it's been kind of out of character for the last couple of sessions to trust local authorities to do anything. And that I thought was a significant recognition.
Earlier in the week, and it seems like a lot of the action happened in the House, but state House members taking an easy process and muddying it up, involving the budget negotiation process with the Senate. They tossed in several head-scratching instructions, like giving back pay to the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, even though he lost his whistleblower lawsuit, and it's going to cost the state about $6 million. They also want conferees to defund the lottery. Annie, nothing is binding, but is the lottery now rolling snake eyes?
So I think everyone knows the saying about, you don't want to watch the sausage being made in the legislative process. In this case, I see a lot of this as being negotiation tactics with the lieutenant governor and the Senate in order to play some ball on some other measures. So I'm not putting a lot of stake in this.
Harvey, I've covered this budget negotiation process a lot, and this was new. I mean, this got convoluted and kind of got weird. What about you?
Well, we have seen historically instructions for the conferees, so that really didn't surprise me as remarkable. But what does surprise me remarkable about the budget is virtually no recognition of what's happening in the outside economy. There's an enormous number of promises that are being made, and the comptroller has said publicly, we can land some of those planes in a recession, but it's almost impossible to land all of those planes in a recession. And so the lack of recognition, he did allow about $1 billion worth of wiggle room in his revenue estimate for a recession, but that may not even may not prove to be even close. And remember, only 15% of the budget, or maybe 20%, is discretionary.
Yeah, Brad, sustainability is a key word in all this. We'll talk about that a little later in this discussion, right? But is sustainability the big unknown with this budget?
Well, I think Harvey's right. You always have to plan for the bad times. I mean, that's conservative budgeting, right? Something I will point out is Lieutenant Governor and the Senate are pushing this increase in the ceiling on the Economic Stabilization Fund, the rainy day fund. I think that's something very important to watch. And the fiscal note that I saw was, if that happens, the estimate by 2029, there will be like $6 billion extra dollars in the state's coffer. That could be massive. That could be the difference between no surplus and some surplus, or a deficit and a bit of a surplus. So, that's something to watch, I think.
One more thing I might add, and that is, if the Department of Education is actually eliminated, that creates an $8 billion deficit right there, with the promise that they will fill it in a subsequent appropriation from Congress. Let's presume that appropriations bill is far from certain coming out of Congress in the first place. And in the second place, we have added all this money for special needs kind of kids, and that's exactly the money that comes out of Department of Education. So there's no guarantee that hole can be filled. At the same time, we're talking about eliminating the lottery, which is $3 or $4 billion per annum. It doesn't make any kind of fiscal sense.
You agree with that, Annie?
I agree that there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and I think there's opportunities for the legislature this session to create some more dedicated funds. For instance, we're trying to abolish THC in Texas. You could create some more licensing and some funding from that industry and dedicate it to these sorts of industries, as to education, et cetera. So there's opportunities here where opportunities may be lost otherwise.
Is an economic slowdown, Brad, the warning for a special session? Are we in trouble?
No, I don't see a special session on that coming. I think the consequences of some sort of economic slowdown will be had next legislative session in what year is that? 27. So I think that's where it'll play out. I think the budget's pretty set here. They're not going to go back and redo things unless things really get bad, which I think it'll take some time to get there, if we even hit there.
Well, lo and behold, the primary season is upon us. It's still got a lot of time to play out, but it is underway, with hats being tossed into several political rings. We know about Ken Paxton challenging John Cornyn, and Paxton getting an endorsement from Adam Lowy on Friday. This week, state Senator Mays Middleton said he'll run for the Attorney General's position, and former Republican Congresswoman Maya Flores says she wants to try again, take on incumbent Democrat Henry Cuellar in the general election. Flores, it's notable that was hospital shortly after making her announcement. Harvey, what race is standing out for you? What are you going to be tracking?
Well, the Attorney General and the Comptroller are the two most fluid at the moment. And I don't think we've seen all the names in either one of them. But Mays Middleton jumping in, he can self-finance, obviously. Ash, the Elon Musk attorney, is not going to want for lack of funds. But I think the one that right now we've got a couple of candidates named for Comptroller in the primary. But I think there's some names off camera that'll start surfacing.
Brad, you confirmed the Adam Lowy endorsement of Ken Paxton. It's surprising, right?
Yeah, I was curious the inclusion of Adam Lowy on a list of conservative, figures endorsing Ken Paxton. But I think, the most interesting thing to me is the Attorney General's race. That is going to be fascinating to watch. Mays Middleton obviously jumped in, announced with $10 million of his own commitment. John Bash is already in. There's a bunch of names, and many of them are legislators. But most of them, they can't self-finance like Middleton can. So they'll announce after the session ends and the moratorium on fundraising concludes.
I can toss in a name that just surfaced the last couple of days for Attorney General. That's Joan Huffman. She's Senate Finance Chair, and it would be a free ride for her. And fundraising for a Senate Finance Chair should be fairly easy.
Harvey, I just talked to her on the phone this morning, and she said she's seriously considering it. So there you go.
Well, there it is. Answered my question right there. Annie, the business community, what race is the business community watching?
Ooh, really all of those in the congressional race with Cuellar and Flores. That's always been a real toss-up, interesting one for the business community. Attorney General, that's always really important. And that Cornyn Paxton race, I'll tell you that the business community has always been very supportive of Senator Cornyn. The Attorney General race, yes, is going to be very lively, and I think it's interesting that anyone would come in and endorse at this point when there are so many names that are going to drop. Some other ones that I've heard that might drop: George P. Bush, Eva Guzman, Brandon Creighton, his name has been thrown out there, Chip Roy. One that you kind of are hearing up and down, Mitch Little is a new state rep. He was involved in the Paxton impeachment trial, but these, it's still just people talking at this point. But it's going to be a very interesting election cycle.
Brad, I think last week you had mentioned that this is going to be possibly a reshuffling period for the Republicans here in Texas. You still thinking that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been pent up energy for 3 cycles, for 3 terms at the statewide level, because nobody's left. Well, now some people are leaving. Paxton running for Senate, Hager going to A&M. We'll see if anything else comes. I don't know, but now's the opportunity. If you've been waiting to run statewide and you haven't yet, why not take a shot now if you can do it?
But Harvey, the big two, still sticking around.
Well, I'm absolutely convinced that Abbott is running, and people who know Patrick say that he's absolutely committed to run, but that still remains to be seen. Needless to say, in the middle of a session, you have to squelch rumors, because as soon as if you don't squelch them, that you might not be running, you become perceived as a lame duck. And I would never suggest that Dan Patrick could lose any authority in the Senate, but he would be weakened if they thought that he was not going to be running again.
Annie, who's your November surprise then?
I think right now, the minute you start hearing rumors about statewide and then who might throw their name in the hat there, you start seeing movement in the Senate, state Senate, and then there's rumors about who from the House is in that Senate district and who's going to move up there. So there's going to be a whole bunch of shuffling. So it's all kind of about who from the House is going to move up to the Senate district, and so it's just so that also creates a lot of sort of this want for the Senate district and less concern about their responsibilities in the House and more their eyes on the Senate. So that kind of influences their vote in this session as well. It's just, yes, politics at its finest.
The candidate most people want to see is Brian Harrison decide to run for Congress and leave the House of Representatives. That would have near universal support.
Well, I tell you what, you guys got me with Joan Huffman. I didn't see that one coming, and I think we just made news with that one. That will be an interesting name to see if that name actually ends up sticking. All right, next topic. The Trump administration pulled a big grant that was to help build the Houston to Dallas bullet train. Those against the project celebrated that move, but Thursday, the new owners of Texas Central told the House Transportation Committee the project is still alive. Brad, this fight has always been about somewhat of a property rights fight, right?
I think there's two sides of it. There's the property rights, and then there's just paying for the dang thing. It's so expensive. That's why they needed federal funding. And you look all across the country, and massive transit plans like this are running into problems because they're so expensive. It's just difficult to do. Then you throw the property rights thing in there, and people don't want to sell their land, understandably. So, I think there are two aspects to this, both applying equal pressure against it actually coming to fruition. We'll see.
Annie, why do Republicans hate trains?
You've Texas and land and eminent domain and people coming to take their land, and you've got, especially in rural areas, that's a line in the sand. And these ranch owners, people, especially even building things around their land. I mean, it's going to be a contentious issue. It doesn't matter what year it is, and if you're conservative or Democrat, you don't take their land without their permission.
Harvey, we're pouring a lot of money, though, into concrete for roads that take land, but we won't pour money into rails. Do you find this really confusing?
Well, first of all, the rail program is still alive, but I would say it's on life support because there really isn't alternate without that federal money. There's really no alternate plan at the moment that makes any sense. But the I, I think the generally we have opposed trains and supported vehicles, individual cars, but the traffic is becoming so overwhelming. Just getting from Dallas to Austin or Dallas to Houston, that you're beginning to, at least anecdotally, feel like there's a surge in support for some kind of alternate travel. But I don't think that it's going to manifest yet. As to what Annie was saying about the rural representation was always able to block any kind of high-speed rail, but their numbers are dwindling, and a lot of these rural districts are turning suburban, and so I think the writing is ultimately on the wall, but the funding is going to be the critical thing.
Lights, camera, action. The Senate this week sending to the House a $500 million bill to help attract film and TV productions to Texas. Annie, you were at the committee hearing in the Senate a couple of weeks ago when Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson testifying, but some so-called conservatives are against it. What's your read on SB 22's fate next week in the House hearing?
Well, I'll say, just as a reminder, you don't really ever see the lieutenant governor and his chief of staff sitting at a legislative hearing watching. So that was definitely camera and lights for the show there. In the House, it's got some important big bill authors. You've got the chairman of the Calendars and Appropriations, authoring that bill. Listen, I think it's sort of disingenuous for really these Republicans to come, oppose this bill when many from the business community are supporting it, even though it's funding, on its face, it's funding for the film incentives and people coming in to shoot movies here. Ultimately, they would say it's some liberal incentives, but listen, this helps support small businesses and local communities like our local florists, restaurants, caterers, print shops, and so on. So I think anyone that would oppose this seems to have sort of a microscopic view on this and not really looking at ultimately the trickle-down effect on what this could do for Texas communities.
Brad, I've heard a lot of talk about putting strings attached, no F-bombs, you got to be good to Texas, no bad stories that hurt Texas. Do you expect to see a lot of strings attached in the House?
Not really, because I don't see how that's, workable for the industry doing this. I think that'll be talked about and probably emphasized by members, but I don't see how they can actually, enforce that. The thing that's curious to me is seems like a prime horse trading issue for the House. What do they get in return for this? I don't know, but there's got to be something that they'll get from the lieutenant governor in exchange for this, because there is such an uproar on the conservative right about it, and they gotta they got to temper that, or at least make it worthwhile.
Is this a bargaining chip, Harvey?
Oh, absolutely. But I think that what's being missed is that there's all this language on the Senate side about social values and cultural values and faith-based kinds of productions. But the reality is that that language doesn't have to be there because this essentially is distributed through the governor's office. And as long as Greg Abbott is governor, there's going to be a rein on what kind of productions are going to be permitted, which I think is obviously destructive to creativity. It's going to drive certain kinds of productions here, not all kinds of productions. But one of the witnesses did say that I think it might have been Harrelson, once we have the film infrastructure in place, which has been deteriorating over the last decade or so, it would be much more attractive, even without the incentives for productions to be done here.
Well, an ugly floor fight broke out in the State House Thursday before the school reform votes took place. It involved a memorial resolution for the late Cecile Richards, who once led Planned Parenthood. That abortion debate really wasn't on my bingo card, but there are some pending bills action in committee on some abortion issues. Brad, does Thursday floor fight kind of foreshadow some problems with those bills?
I think it shows two things. First of all, it's retribution for a couple of things that happened on budget night or back on the rules vote when the question was called and debate was ended from these conservative members. And so I think part of it is getting back at them for that because some of their votes, record votes that they wanted weren't had due to that fact. So there's that. But then I think it shows there is actually a coordinated opposition to the speaker on certain things, rather than Brian Harrison calling the motion to vacate and being almost alone with himself there. There's some sort of opposition mounting, and I think they're going to be pretty strategic and selective on what it is they try and fight about.
Harvey, you agree? Is this more about infighting within the Texas GOP than an abortion debate?
I think that Brad may correct me on this, but it looked to me that like this was ignited by a single post from Michael Quinn Sullivan, who is Tim Dunn's state spokesman for all practical purposes. And for somebody who wears their Christianity on their sleeve, the kind of post that he did, he was calling her scum. No grace, no sense of proportion there. And I think more than anything, it was simply once that torch was lit or once that flame was ignited, they really had to make that an issue.
To quote Anchorman, things kind of escalated very quickly, right, Annie?
Yes, it did. And I want to say that, this sets a really bad precedent. These memorial bills are sacred resolutions that memorialize lives. They are really things that were untouchable as far as partisan issues. And, they're now sort of piled in with these local bills that are generally adopted and passed and generally safe. And what this does now, potentially, is this could really change the entire legislative process and make everything come to a screeching halt. And that, I mean, I know this is all inside baseball, but for the listeners, we may not have another local calendar because of sort of this retribution back and forth. The R's really killed an entire local calendar, so the D's may come back. So in order to avoid that, what once were local bills may be put on the general calendar, and the general calendar is already backed up. So in other words, everything might be slowed down. So these dissenters that have complained about the process being slow and that we're not getting bills passed, they're the very ones that could be causing a lot of bills to die because of their actions on Thursday.
I would add that this fight over the Cecile Richards resolution has been brewing for a while. Members were on the conservative right, had been pushing leadership to not include it for a while. And so I think this one was an exception for them that they didn't want to take. And you heard it on the floor that, they could not in good conscience have anything to do with this thing passing. So, it's part of a broader fight, and it might cause a ripple effect down the road. And, Democrats killed the rest of the calendar too. It was a tit for tat. Both sides were involved in this. But that is something to watch. Might these local calendars continue to die at a pretty fast rate? That's certainly possible.
And as to Annie's point, in terms of bills, if you don't have a local calendar, it has to go to the general calendar. We've essentially got 2 weeks left for bills to be set and heard in committee, and that we're approaching a choke point here right now, and we just went to DEFCON 3, if not DEFCON 4.
Yep.
Yeah, it felt like the committee, though, just was asleep at the wheel on this one. You got to see that, this is a landmine within the whole thing. And, I got the feeling it was almost a setup, guys. What do you think, Annie?
I have to say, after doing this for over 20 years, you have to think that there might be some negotiating behind the scenes that say, hey, y'all are here for a reason to sort of create some dissension, some stirring up. So you continue to play that role. And, we're not here to necessarily pass a whole bunch of bills. So there might have been some of that.
Think that this was the fight of the session there, Brad, and that, everything else is going to be kind of maybe smooth sailing?
No, I don't think so. But I will say this does provide an interesting test of the speaker's mettle. How can he manage these pretty clear fractures, not just in the Republican caucus, but the entire body as a whole. You had the big victory for him, which was essentially Brian Harrison delivering him a Republican majority where he didn't have one before. Well, now Democrats may be starting to realize that, and they don't want to lose their influence. So back and forth, back and forth. This will not be the last fight of the session.
Representative Romero almost had everyone singing, though. We almost had a good kumbaya moment there.
I was going to say, he's got a really good voice. I will add, I would just say, the speaker has accomplished what he promised to do, the budget and the governor's big ESA. If everything, just comes to pieces at this point, he's checked the boxes.
I want to do a quick shout out for Representative Romero too, because he historically has been somewhat of a firebrand, but since he's become the chairman of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, he's been collaborative with the speaker. He got appointed to the calendars committee, and he's beginning to emerge as a statesman on the Democratic side, which I think is pretty interesting.
I'm going to put him in there with Trey Martinez Fisher. Trey originally was a moderate, then he firebrand. Now he's gone back to elder statesman, and Romero seems to be falling into that same thing with the So it's interesting to see some of the leadership evolution that's going on there. You can see our full discussion by going to the Fox 7 YouTube page and to Fox Local. But let's wrap things up with one final word. Can you believe it? One final word for this week. All right, guys, let's try it. Harvey, what's your one word?
I'm going to go back to tariffs.
Annie, can you do it with a word?
Reflective.
Brad, what is your word?
Abbott.
And with that, we're wrapping up another week in Texas politics.